When I think of the stories that stick out to me, it's usually not the plots or the beautiful prose that first come to mind. It's the characters. A good fantasy author will plunge you into the inner consciousness of their characters, revealing all their inner struggles and how their mentality shifts as they tackle hardship after hardship. You understand why they feel the way they do because you're right there with them through all of it. So there's a lot to gain from a good character. The complex situations that characters get into and what they ultimately take away from them is not meant for these fictional characters. It's meant for you, the reader. What the characters learn, the reader learns also. Without believable characters, nothing else in the story would really hold together too well. So I took the time to think about some characters that mean a lot to me, and it was hard to narrow it down to just 10. Plus, this is gonna change constantly as I read more books, but as of yet, here are 10 of my favorite fantasy characters. But wait, a quick word from today's sponsor. Skillshare is a huge online learning community where you can basically learn any skill you'd ever want to. People ask me a lot about my editing. Well, you can learn how to edit your videos with Skillshare. They got classes on how to use Adobe Premiere Pro, as well as Adobe After Effects, both of which I use. Maybe you want to learn more about photography or animation, creative writing, or maybe even just how to be more productive. Skillshare has classes for really anything. I just finished a class called Writing Character-Driven Short Stories by Yoon Lee, and if you're looking for advice for writing compelling characters like the ones I'll be talking about in the rest of this video, then this might be a course for you. Skillshare thankfully has no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can follow wherever your creativity takes you. And it's less than $10 a month for an annual subscription, but why not try it out first? For a limited time, you can use the link in my description to get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. This list will be free of any spoilers, and it's in no particular order. I love all of these characters, most of these characters, equally, as if they were my very own children. Okay, well maybe not all of them. They're all different, but there's definitely some characters in here that I'd probably disown if they were my child. But without further ado, here are my top 10 favorite fantasy characters. Wait, I already did that. Fitz Chivalry Farseer from the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. If you enjoy watching a character go through a lot of crap, well, Fitz has you covered. He goes through so much over the course of his journey, and you just really feel like you live his life with him. I feel like I have been in his head, I have related to him, and I have gone through the ringer with this character. Honestly, I'd say that Fitz is one of the best fictional characters I've read. Yes, for sure I can be frustrated when he's a little too whiny or depressing or just completely blind to other people's motivations, but it's weaknesses like this that just make his character feel so real. Also the Fool and Night Eyes, because what would Fitz be without them? They're also included in my appreciation. Night Eyes, I feel closer to that wolf than I do to most human characters. The Mistborn books by Brandon Sanderson are a lot of fun, despite having a very bleak setting. These books have one of the most interesting and well thought out magic systems that I've read, as well as some amazing characters, Vin being one of my favorites. When we first meet Vin as an orphan surviving on the ash-covered streets of Luthadel, she's very untrusting, and she tries to make herself as unsuspecting and as invisible as possible. Like Fitz, Vin also starts off as like the ultimate underdog, and I'm a big sucker for underdog stories. She ends up joining a crew of allomancers looking to take down the Lord Ruler, and it's from here on out where her character really begins to grow. Her character growth does take some time, which I think was done really well and feels very realistic. She's given some incredible action scenes, but I would say that it's Vin's internal struggles and how much growth she goes through over the course of the books that are a huge part of why I love her character. Luna. Dalinar Kholin from the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Honestly, I had a pretty hard time deciding between Kaladin, Shallan, or Dalinar. I was tempted to put all three of them on this list because I adore them. I feel like the Stormlight Archive has some of Sanderson's very best character work, and these three are prime examples of it. They all go through a lot of character growth, but by the end of the third book, to me, Dalinar kind of rises above the other two as far as my favorite character. He has one of the best character arcs in the series. He was a terrible person. He committed war crimes. He is a former warlord turned peacekeeper, and nobody really trusts him when he says he wants to unite the people for the greater good because of all the murdering that he did. But I think what makes him such a brilliant character is just how inspiring he is. He's proof that while your past can never be removed, it can be used to build you into a better person, someone who learns from their mistakes and tries to forge a better life. I'm a big fan of redemption stories and people trying to better themselves, so you're probably gonna see a few more characters like that on this list. Next is KVOTHE, or Quoth, however you care to pronounce it. I've made quite a few Kingkiller Chronicle videos on my channel, but I have never really given my thoughts on KVOTHE. He's a polarizing character, to say the least, and one of the reasons why I like his character so much is that he isn't entirely likable. KVOTHE is a character that's gone through immense personal tragedy, and he's turned to music and learning as a means of providing solace. I would say he's kind of a Sherlock type of character. He's a genius when it comes to certain subjects. He's also often an idiot when it comes to a lot of other things. He can let his ego and his anger get the better of him, which leads him to make immensely reckless decisions that endanger himself and everyone around him. And we learn that the stories told about him are hugely overblown and sometimes far from the truth. In fact, he often stretches the truth to inflate his own legendary status. See, this is why I never really agree with some criticisms I've heard that KVOTHE is a Mary Sue or Gary Stu type of character, because even though he's very smart and talented, he has a lot of flaws, and in fact, he's kind of the main cause of all of his problems. He messes things up constantly. He's kind of a catastrophe magnet. KVOTHE is his own worst enemy. There's a lot of good qualities about him as well, but I think it's these flaws and the mystery of why he's hiding his true identity and living as an innkeeper in the present day that make him so interesting. And it took me a good reread or two to really notice the extent of his flaws. When I started reading The Blade itself, book 1 in The First Law by Joe Abercrombie, there's one character that I wasn't expecting to enjoy as much as I did. Glokta was once a dashing swordsman, a war hero who was captured and tortured for 2 years by the Gurkish. He was left broken, a bitter shell of the man he used to be, and he's grown to resent everyone around him, and is now a shunned cripple and torturer himself as one of the king's inquisitors. Glokta lives a pretty miserable life, where even the simple act of climbing stairs or getting out of bed results in a lot of pain, frustration, and embarrassment. Abercrombie gives such an overwhelming description of somebody living with a disability, living in pain constantly, and Glokta is just very much a cynical character with some hilarious inner monologue, and he's not a character you like because he's a nice guy, you like him because he's an interesting character. He may not be a likable person, but he oozes with personality. Glokta is in constant physical agony, and it can be seen and felt in the way that he acts. Glokta is more than up to the task of sharing some of his pain with others. If only there wasn't so many steps. While I'm only 5 books into the Wheel of Time, I already consider it one of my favorite series. But the reason I mention it is that my opinions on characters could end up changing over time, but out of all of them, I would say that the central protagonist of the series, Rand al'Thor, is the one I find the most compelling. All of the stuff that Rand goes through is more than enough to make any person go crazy, though he has more of an excuse than most people. There's not a lot I can say without spoiling things, but the direction his character is going in is something I've really been enjoying. Another Wheel of Time character makes the list. MORAINE DANODRED is one of the main driving forces of the series, and I think that she deserves a lot more credit. She's kept the main cast of characters alive so many times. I agree with Daniel Green that she is kind of an evolution of Gandalf. She fits into that old wise wizard trope, but brings it to the next level. There's a lot to respect about her. She's a very mysterious and powerful character, and she's able to keep her head in whatever situation is thrown at her. While she can be stubborn, she's also willing to admit when she's wrong. She's willing to go against the norm of the Aes Sedai, to distance herself and be an example of what an Aes Sedai should be. Geralt of Rivia is a man that's haunted by society's views on him. In order to become a monster slayer and protect everybody, he had to go through various mutations, which kind of makes him something other than human, and because of this, he's an outcast in a society that thinks he's an emotionless monster. He often struggles with believing some of these ideas himself, and we see a lot through his inner dialogue. He's an incredibly deep character, and this only becomes more apparent as the books go on. He really doesn't fit the mold of your average fantasy protagonist. Geralt's dry, sarcastic humor and the sort of father-daughter relationship he has with Ciri are two of my favorite things of the series, and he definitely deserves a spot on this list. The first Law books by Joe Abercrombie have some of the very best character work that I've read in any fantasy book. I've already talked about Glokta, but now it's time to talk about Logan Ninefingers. Say one thing for Logan Ninefingers, say that he's a badass. In terms of badassatry, he's right up there with Geralt of Rivia. He's one of my favorite characters of all time, and one of the reasons is that he is trying to change himself. He's the most feared man in the North, a barbarian known as the Bloody Nine, and he's trying to run away from himself and his very dark past. He wants to become a better man, to turn away from the path of senseless violence that he's followed. Ironically, he doesn't even really care for fighting, though he sure does a lot of it. I really enjoy reading his inner conflict and his moral struggle. In short, he's a terrible man looking to make himself a better person despite the awful world around him.
We needs a few good taters. Potatoes!
Fact, we all wish we could have a friend as loyal as Samwise Gamgee. Without Sam's loyalty and courage, the One Ring would never have been destroyed, so he's kinda the real hero. He may not be that powerful or anything like that, but he's one of the best sidekick characters that there ever was. So those are my top 10 favorite fantasy characters, at least as of yet. It was kind of difficult narrowing it down to just 10, so I'm gonna leave a list of some honorable mentions. Let me know your top 10 characters in the comments, and if you want to help support the channel, then make sure to check out my Patreon. I want to give a special shout out to my most recent high tier patron, Braden McDonald.